Hello and welcome to our virtual family program. My name is David Gray, one of the therapists here at Casa Palmera. And the first group that we're going to do for family program on your schedule is probably titled Emotional Regulation, but that has to do really with feelings. And typically when I start this group, if you were all here with me, I would have walked in, the board would have been completely blank, and then this stuff gets filled in as we're talking. Since we're doing things a little bit different, and I don't have you with me to answer questions that generates things getting put up here on the board, I put some things up here that typically are talked about during this group, because what we're going to do during this group is talk about the role of feelings and how that's led to us all being here today. And one of the things I often ask when we're starting off this group is I'll ask to the family members and participants in family program, of all the topics we could possibly talk about to start off our family program, why is this one the one that we're starting with? Dealing with feelings. And I'll generally ask the question, what has been our relationship to feelings prior to coming into treatment? And people will generally say several things like, we've been pretty much detached, disconnected, we attempt to avoid, numb, or we kind of discount and dismiss or minimize feelings, that they control us as opposed to us controlling them. And in many cases, when you look at all of the various things we treat here, from depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, and addictive disorders, one of the things that those all have in common is difficulty dealing with feelings in healthy, effective, adaptive ways and coping with them in ways that serve us well. So we start off our first program, our first group and family program, talking about the significance of feelings and how that's really led to us being here today. And I also want to take a minute and share something with you that occurred about 25 years ago in the early part of my career in therapy and counseling. And this was a local treatment center I was working at, and we were very privileged to have a speaker come in by the name of Dr. Claudia Black. Dr. Claudia Black has written many books. She's an internationally renowned author, and Dr. Claudia Black really has some profound insight at understanding certain things about family systems and healing that really made an impression on me earlier in my career and still do to this day. One of them is I remember when she was given the group to us, counselors and therapists and interns, she asked us a question. She said, why do we put so much emphasis on feelings in treatment? And when we're doing process group and we have patients check into process group, we want them to identify how they're doing emotionally and say one or two feeling words. And we want them to go deeper than good, fine, or okay. When you say like good, fine, okay, those aren't feelings, those aren't emotions. That's more like a grocery store check-in is kind of how I like to say it. I'm at the grocery store, hey Dave, how you doing? I'm fine. Bob, how you doing? Oh, I'm good, thanks for asking. And it's not like, in a line at a grocery store, I'd say, well, I'm really discouraged and frustrated and depressed. How are you doing, Bob? That's not the way we talk. And so we get used to kind of speaking in non-feeling ways to describe feelings. So what Dr. Black continued to say was, she said, what is our relationship to feelings? When people are coming into treatment, they're often very disconnected and detached from their feelings. And she then went on to give like this 3-step process, of which I've written 2 of them up here on the board, where she talked about the importance of us getting our needs met emotionally, right? So think about it. Prior to coming into treatment, how have people been doing getting their emotional needs met? And generally, if they're honest, the answer is not very well. So as Dr. Black put it, in order to get your needs met, you need to know what your needs are, but you can't know what your needs are if you don't know what you're feeling. And you have to start learning to identify and express your feelings to then be able to learn what your needs are. You have to learn what your needs are in order to get your needs met. And I'll present to you that the majority of people coming into treatment haven't been doing a good job in any of those areas. They're not getting their needs met, if they really even know what their needs are, and they're not really clear on what their needs are because they have a really hard time identifying and expressing feeling and emotion. So you'll see the role between feelings, knowing what needs are, and getting needs met is really essential. So it's one of the reasons why we put so much emphasis on feelings and the role that they have played bringing people here into treatment. Furthermore, there's a saying that I love that I've learned along the way with recovery. You can sum up all of recovery by saying we need to learn to survive our feelings. And once again, it's hard to survive your feelings if you don't even know what they are. And it's pretty hard to learn how to do that when we can't even really identify what we're often thinking and feeling in the first place and be able to express it in ways that are healthy and effective. So what happens is we stay trapped and stuck with them, and they're all inside kind of a jumbled mess. And there's another thing too that was really important with this. If you want to change how you're feeling, you need to change what? And if you said thinking, you're pretty accurate on that. In order to change our feelings, we have to work on changing what we're thinking, right? Because thoughts are going to generate feelings at a pretty significant level. So when we have an uncomfortable emotional experience, generally that's happening because of what's going on with our thought process. One of the things that I really like to challenge people with is to kind of look at thinking and the role it plays in experience. To this extent, is it this thing that's my problem, or is it the way I'm thinking about this thing that's my problem? And quite honestly, it's often the way I'm thinking about this thing that's creating some of the more difficult problems and challenges that I'm really experiencing. Much more so than the thing itself, again, is often how I'm thinking about it. Kind of another way to look at that, using nothing more than this, can I jack anxiety up from a 3 to an 8? And the answer to that is, yes, I can. How long does it take? Just nanoseconds. But that also means what? If using nothing more than this, I can jack anxiety up from a 3 to an 8, that also means I can learn how to bring it back down, right? And I also really want to stress that word. Right? Learn. It's also really important that we don't beat ourselves up. I like to say we are the way we are because we've learned how to be that way. And upon self-examination, when we realize some of those ways aren't necessarily serving us well or working too well, we get to learn how to do and be differently. I love the way one of my mentors put it. He would say, David, you can't continue to do and be the way you've always been and done. And if that way of doing this and being this clearly isn't working for you, you need to examine that and work on change. And he would really challenge me to examine my way of doing and being and where change was needed in my own life. And his name was Dr. William Hurd. He's one of my greatest mentors, and I really appreciate the many lessons he taught me and the gifts that he gave me. So as we're looking at this, let me give you an example of the relationship between anxiety and our emotional experience. And this is going to lead to an explanation of something that you may find quite interesting. I know I certainly have. Let's take a look at the role of anxiety here and how it functions. So, anxiety, which is one of the more challenging emotions by far that we deal with, there's been some interesting studies that have shown when anxiety goes up, something that we really need access to is decreasing and going down. Something else is then distorting. So the answers to these fill in the blanks. And again, normally when we're together in person, I'm asking this and I'm getting answers from everybody in the audience. So at this point in time, just kind of go ahead and guess some of this yourself and see how they fall in line with what I put up here as the answers. The more anxiety is going up, what's actually going down is access to our IQ. Now, this isn't permanent. It's only a function of while we're in that experience of anxiety. But it's really important to understand how disabling anxiety can be. So the more anxiety is going up, the more access to my IQ is going down, all right? The next thing that's then distorting is going to be perspective, right? So think about this. This is a really bad combination. The more anxiety is going up, the more access to my IQ is going down. As that's happening, the more my perspective is distorting, and then I got to do what? I've got to make a decision. So think about this. I'm in a situation where I need to engage in a decision-making process with anxiety that's jacked up through the roof, IQ that's hammered down, and perspective that's wildly distorted. what are the chances of that decision serving me well or being effective? Generally not too well. On top of that, how about if I'm not really in touch with feelings to begin with, and I'm not quite sure what my needs are, and I'm not really clear on how to get those needs met? You start seeing how this all can get really confusing and overwhelming. Now, average IQ is 100, right? Genius levels of IQ are figured to start around 140. When we're getting down into the 70s and 80s, we're having a problem with developmental delays. So imagine that as my anxiety is jacking up, I'm now down to 90, I'm now down to 80, I'm now down to 70, I'm now down below 60, having a really hard time thinking clearly, reasonably, rationally, or responsibly. Now, this phenomenon also goes by two words in description, something everybody's undoubtedly heard this name before. It's called panic attack. And in the midst of a panic attack, I'm literally convinced of what? Some of you are going to know the answer to this, and you already said it. I'm literally convinced I'm going to die. And I'm not thinking, boy, this is really uncomfortable, and I'd sure like this anxiety to go away. I'm convinced death is imminent, and it's going to happen any second. Now, that's as illogical and irrational as it can be. There's no truth to it, but it's what my mind is telling me in this hyper-aroused state of anxiety that's out of control. And I say this respectfully, a panic attack is just dysregulated anxiety that's out of control. So it really begins to show the significance that we have to start learning how to identify our emotions and feelings, understand what our needs are in this area, and the crucial, vital importance of us being able to get those needs met. So let's take a look at a couple other things here too. So the process of behavioral change. I put this up here kind of as a reminder because I wanted to talk a little bit about how we change in life. And sometimes, people say things like, well, just don't do that. And I don't do that, why do you? And we'll just stop it. So that also is kind of like equated with the term just say no. Now some of you may know that sounds familiar, and it came from Nancy Reagan in the 1980s, the Just Say No campaign. So was Just Say No considered a success, or was it a failure? And the way my professor put it when I was in school, and he went over this with us, the Just Say No campaign was not really considered to be highly successful. But then he asked us all a question. He said, why? And he really stumped us. None of us guessed the answer correctly that he was about to give. And I found this to be absolutely profound. It's another one of those things that every day since I've heard it, now well over 25 years ago, it has become truer and truer. And it's at the essence of behavioral change. The key to this holds the power as to whether or not we truly change or we don't and we just stay the same. So I really want to take a little bit of time here to stress the significance of why Just Say No didn't work, because it's really going to open the door to helping us to understand how to truly change and transform in powerful, meaningful ways. The reason why Just Say No didn't work, it's very simple, but very profound. Just Say No didn't work because it did not teach us or put emphasis or focus on what to just say yes to. There it is. Now, while that seems incredibly simple, it is, but it's also incredibly profound. So what you can think of recovery, of healing and wellness, kind of think about it this way. It's about replacement theory. Right? In other words, what is it that you're now going to do instead of that thing that you're realizing that you need to stop? So whether it's, oh, I need to stop the use of alcohol or other drugs. Okay. Can I continue to be negative, closed, guarded, defensive, resistant? Can I continue to be angry and resentful? Can I continue to have a hard time asking for help and wanting to do things my own way when maybe those clearly are not working for me? I don't think so. If I really truly want to change, many things in my life are going to have to change. So while it's really important to understand what I need to stop doing, transformative change happens as I start doing these things instead. And let's take a look at another lesson from nature that really strongly teaches us the power of this lesson. And that saying It's not as common as I used to think it was. Kind of like, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? Pretty much everybody's heard that one, right? Not everybody's heard this one. So this may be new for you, and it really holds the key also as to why this is so powerfully true. And this saying is, nature abhors a vacuum. So first, to really understand the significance of this, let's define abhors. So what do you think the meaning of abhors is? Often when I ask that question, people say hates, and I say, okay, hatred on steroids times 100. I would much rather have you hate me than abhor me. The definition of abhors is intense loathing. It's one of the most intense words of passionate disgust and hatred that exists in the English language, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. So what does that mean? And what is its significance to why just say no didn't work? Because it didn't teach us what to just say yes to, right? Anytime we stop doing something, whether it's I'm stopping a behavior, I'm stopping a certain way of thinking, what does that create? If you said vacuum, you're right. That creates a vacuum. Also herein lies the truth of why relapse rates are so high. Relapse rates are high because all we focus on doing is what not to do, and it just doesn't work. A really good friend of mine says if all you're concentrating on is not drinking, all you're concentrating on is drinking. So again, focusing on what we're not going to do just doesn't work. It's like if I was to say to you, stop thinking about the color purple. Does it work? Not so much, right? So the idea behind this, nature abhors a vacuum. Anytime in nature something is taken away, it creates a vacuum. That vacuum cannot and will not exist in nature. Something will always come in to replace that which has been taken away, right? And I often give this example. So I have 2 kidneys, about as big as my fists. I don't know if they're quite that big because I have big hands. If one of my kidneys was to be removed, what would happen to that empty, hollow kidney space? Would it just stay there, and on CAT scan and things of that type, they'd be able to see, oh, we used to have a kidney there. Now it's gone, but that empty, hollow kidney space is still there. Of course that wouldn't happen. It would very quickly be surrounded by existing bodily organs, tissues, and fluids, right? That's the idea of what happens in nature. When a vacuum is created, something always comes in to fill it up. The same for us. So for any type of behavioral change and transformation to take place, it's not just that we need to accept and understand this is what I've got to stop doing, but it's vitally crucial to then say, and I must replace it with this. So these are going to be things healthy and constructive, right? Maybe here's kind of another way to think about it, and I'll hold off putting this up here on the board because I'm already getting a lot of stuff up there on the board. Think about it this way, and I'll even ask this as a question. Attachment, good or bad? Dependence, good or bad? And sometimes when I ask that question, people hear dependence and they think, oh, bad. I'll say, well, not really. It depends. It depends on what we're dependent on and what we're attached to. Oftentimes, as people are coming into treatment, what we find upon examination is they've developed dependency on and attachment to things that are pretty unhealthy and destructive. Unhealthy and destructive dependence and attachment is always going to lead to unhealthy results and outcomes. We need to stop that and replace it with what? Okay, I'm being master of the obvious on this one. We need to replace it with healthy attachment and healthy dependence. As we do that, we start getting much better and improved results and outcomes. All right? So a lot of this stuff I'm saying is really pretty simple. And most of recovery is actually very simple. People often come into treatment and they think that the answers for them are somehow deeply mysterious and profoundly complex, and they're baffled and overwhelmed and confused by it. And I can really appreciate how it seems that way. But the good news is what actually ends up happening is the answers for them are generally far more simple than they ever imagined. It's just, here's where it's important for us to understand, don't confuse simple with easy. So now I'd like to segue to something that may initially seem a little bit odd. I want to show you a guaranteed way to stay sick and stuck. a guaranteed way to not get better. Now, you might ask me, David, why are you doing that? Well, one way I found to learn that can really be effective is to understand the opposite of what something is. So if we look at the opposite of how to heal and get well, and we understand the guaranteed way to stay sick and be stuck, it can really help us to understand the significant importance of doing the opposite. And I've also encountered many people over the years, whether it's loved ones and family members of those in treatment, or those in treatment themselves, that really get stuck in this place. So here's kind of what it looks like. You'll often see people kind of in this place here, where you could best characterize them as saying they're really fighting and resisting. And in addition to fighting and resisting, you'll often see them really bitter, angry, and resentful. And it's no coincidence the acronym for that is BAR, because it really does block the ability to experience healing and wellness. And in addition to that, you'll find them engaged in a lot of fault and blame. Now, that fault and blame is then going to be generally directed at one of two areas. And for people that are high in shame, a lot of self-blame, you'll see a lot of their fault and blame directed towards self. All right? And then the second one is their fault and blame is going to be directed at others. Now, this more characterizes people that have a really hard time taking responsibility for self and being accountable for self. They have a tendency to blame the proverbial them, they, he, she, or it in life. And if only them, they, he, she, or it would somehow be different, then they could be okay. And what we really end up learning by experience, our problems are not due to them, they, he, she, or it. Say that one fast 3 times in a row. Our problems are really due to our inability to effectively deal with them, they, he, she, or it in life. So that externalization of blame and focus is not going to help us to get better, and it's really not the reason for the challenges or the problems that we're having in life. So as you look at this, think about this as somebody being really trapped and really stuck, right? Because this is a guaranteed way of somebody to stay exactly that. They're going to be trapped and stuck. In fact, here's another saying that I'm going to spin just a little bit for you, because we've all heard this one before, but I'm going to put a little twist on it. That's my story. And you probably already said it, right? I'm going to say it just a little bit different. That's my story, and I'm stuck to it, right? So an important part of healing and wellness is us getting unstuck from our story. In order to do that, it is essential that we get out of this place right here. Are there times when somebody is in this place and it's really understandable why and how they're there? The answer to that is yes. There's people who have been victimized and victims of traumatic assaults and horrible things that can happen to us in the human condition. And you know what? I agree with you. There's times where life can be unfair. Things happen that aren't right, and they're deeply hurtful and very troubling. And as a result of some of those experiences, it leaves us in this place. It's very understandable. Then there's also other times where people are in this place, and it's not like anything bad has really happened in their lives. It's just more that proverbial chip on the shoulder, where they got a chip on the shoulder so big you wonder how they fit through the door, right? But here's my question about that. Does it matter which one of those two it is as to whether or not it's still going to be a block to healing and wellness? And the truth is, it doesn't matter. So whether it's completely understandable or it's just that proverbial chip on my shoulder, it's going to be a block to healing and wellness if I stay trapped in this place. And I'm the one that has to make a decision to get out of there. Part of my own story, when I ended up in treatment at the age of 33, I had a therapist say something really profound to me. He said, David, can I ask you a question? And I reluctantly said, yeah, because he was kind of like that, and I knew where he was going with it. He was probably going to say something I didn't want to look at. And he said, I understand you've been through a lot of trauma in your life and a lot of real difficulty, and you've really been wounded by it. And I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, so let me ask you a question. Who today is responsible for your healing? And boy, that froze me, because I knew the answer. Was I going to continue to live in learned helplessness and chronic victimization? Was I going to finally in my life begin to take responsibility for my healing? And it's significant in that I had been kind of trapped and stuck here myself. And with that therapist saying that and my willingness to listen to him, I began doing what was necessary to replace fault and blame. Here's the solution for this one. To replace fault and blame with responsibility. So rather than being stuck in the fault and blame model, I began to shift into the responsibility model, which is basically me taking a look at what am I responsible for in my life, in my past, all the way up until present. And what am I responsible for in the present going forward so that I can truly begin to experience change and healing in my life. It was very powerful. So I presented this here just so that you can see perhaps yourself, or if you have any loved ones that you find to be here, it is absolutely essential that we do whatever is necessary to get out of that place so that healing can happen. And let me also spend just a minute here talking about a couple things that I think are just essential for healing to be able to happen. And it's the importance of understanding. Sorry about how squeaky these pens are. The importance of understanding, the importance of acceptance, and then I'm actually going to make this a three-step approach with something that's really significant and meaningful. But let's take a look at this. In order for us to truly experience healing, we must develop understanding and acceptance of a variety of things. Understanding and acceptance of what's led us here. Understanding and acceptance of what needs to be done moving forward. And by the way, when I say acceptance, I don't mean that we just excuse and justify and okey-doke things that have happened. Like, I'm just supposed to accept that. That's not what this type of acceptance means. This type of acceptance means I accept what's happened. I get out of the bargaining and the coulda, woulda, shoulda, and living in so much regret over it. I'm able to understand what's happened. I'm able to accept what's happened. I understand and accept my role and my part, my responsibility, the role and part of others, what their responsibility was, and I really work to understand and accept what I now need to do to start to change and get better. And the reason why I put them in this order, I think it's much harder to accept something that we don't understand. And when we work on understanding, that can then begin to open the door into acceptance. Now, I also want to talk about a couple more emotions here that are very powerful in the healing process, and also that we have a lot of problems with. And then I'm going to give you this third item here on something that I think you may find to be a real blessing to yourself and others, especially in your relationships. So first, let's take a look at a couple of emotions. I'm kind of running out of room here, which isn't unusual for me when I'm doing these groups. But let's take a look here at where we can put it. So a couple of feelings here. So guilt, and anger. So here's my question. We'll start off with anger as the first one. Anger, good or bad? Now, chances are many of you guessed both. Some of you said bad. I know, I'm not sure how many said good, but anger just is. I like to say anger is neither good nor bad. In fact, there's times when it's unhealthy for somebody not to be angry, when they really should be angry, but they don't feel like they can allow themselves to be angry. That's a problem. Then, of course, there's other problems with people that are so angry all the time that it just really becomes toxic and destructive in their lives. Now, anger is neither good nor bad. It's a human emotion. It depends on how we deal with it. That would be either good or bad. When we don't deal with anger well, what does it become? If you said resentment, you're right. So think about this. We don't deal in an effective way with anger, it becomes resentment. Now we start seeing the role of feelings and how they really start creating problems for us in life and in recovery, right? So the same question about resentment. Is resentment good or bad? And if you guess bad, you're also correct. Resentment is always toxic, it's always destructive, it's very corrosive to the individual, very corrosive to the heart and soul. So now I want to ask the same questions about guilt. Is guilt good or bad? And it's interesting, again, when I ask this in family programs when we're all here together, is you get a lot of interesting responses to that question. And I'm going to say the same thing again. It's neither good nor bad, it's a normal human emotion. In fact, I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with somebody who had no sense of guilt. Our prisons are filled with them, and it goes by the name sociopath. So, guilt is what? I've done something bad or wrong, I should feel guilty. It'd be unhealthy not to in that particular situation. Now, I do want to make just kind of a little bit of a side note here on this issue of guilt. My mentor again, Dr. Hurd, he taught me something that I found to be very interesting about guilt and our relationship with it. He talked about two forms of guilt. One, he said, is existential guilt. I've done something wrong, I've done something bad or wrong, and I should feel guilty. Again, it'd be unhealthy not to in that particular situation. The other one, however, is neurotic guilt. Neurotic guilt, I've done nothing bad or wrong, but I'm convinced I have. Now, you may be this person, or you may know somebody who is like this. They're always apologizing to everybody for everything. They're always feeling wrong, and they're always saying they're sorry. And you point it out to them, and you know what they say? You guessed it. They say, I'm sorry. And it's very, very painful to be that person. So the issue there with somebody who's feeling neurotic guilt is for them to be able to resign from that and know that they have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for way too much. They've done nothing bad or wrong, even though they're constantly feeling as though they have. They need to really learn to start developing a much healthier relationship to guilt so that they're not feeling so over-guilted all the time. Again, it's a very painful place to be. Now, getting back to the question, is guilt good or bad? We've established it's neither. Guilt simply is. But what happens when we don't deal with guilt well? What does it become? If you said shame, you're right again. When we don't deal in an effective way with guilt, it becomes shame. So here's my question now on shame. Is shame good or bad? It's always bad, it's always destructive, it's always going to be toxic and corrosive to the heart and soul. So, are there people who have their fair share of resentment and or shame who walk in the doors of treatment? You better believe there are. And it's incredibly painful, and it's going to be very toxic and destructive to their ability to get well. So you can see that there's so much more that needs to happen in somebody's life than just stopping the use of alcohol or other drugs. Stopping the use of alcohol or other drugs now gives us a chance to truly begin to heal. In fact, here's another interesting way to look at it, and I've been saying this quite a bit over the course of the past year. When addiction is active, meaning somebody has a substance use disorder and a problem with alcohol or other drugs, that problem has become so severe, it's like the house is on fire. Virtually every other problem or issue or concern in their life is like you need to remodel the living room or remodel the kitchen. And I mean any other problem, whether it's depression, anxiety, whether it's trauma, you name it, whatever the other underlying conditions can be. If addiction is active, it's now become the number one presenting problem in life, and it has got to be put in remission for us to now have a chance to resolve those underlying issues or conditions. So that again, addiction is active, the house is on fire. We don't want to talk about remodeling the living room or the kitchen when we're ignoring a house fire. We got to get that thing put out. Let's get it into remission. Now we can deal on all these underlying issues, and we can do so really quite successfully. So the thing that I wanted to kind of close here with, I kind of gave this three-step process here on the importance of understanding, the importance of acceptance. And the reason what I'm going to tie this in here is for people that are really suffering with shame. People that are really suffering with shame, here's a powerful definition of shame. Guilt, I did something bad or wrong. Shame, I am something bad or wrong. The solution for shame is self-forgiveness. So let's take a look at this. self-forgiveness, I'm going to put here as item number 3, right? And I'm going to do it along these lines. Think about this. It's very hard to forgive something that we don't accept. Many people coming through our doors for help aren't really doing too well with self-acceptance. Also, it's really hard to accept something we don't understand. And you could also say it's true that many people coming through our doors in need of help don't really understand themselves that well, have really good insight and awareness and understanding into what's happened in their life. So we need to really work on self-understanding. As we work on self-understanding, that now opens the door to self-acceptance being possible. As we then work on self-acceptance, we've now opened the door to be able to enter into self-forgiveness. And I'll say it again, because it's much more difficult to forgive something that we don't accept. It's much more difficult to accept something that we don't understand. So that has to do with healing the relationship for the individual, the relationship with self, where self-forgiveness is needed. And many people coming into treatment are seriously in need of self-forgiveness, as maybe you are. Another way to look at this too is, what about other forgiveness? It's very hard to heal in family relationships and our significant other relationships if we lack forgiveness of another. Because to not forgive means we continue to live in the anger and the hurt and the pain and the bitterness or the resentment. And again, it just becomes very hard to be able to heal while doing that. Now, as a therapist, I'm never going to tell someone you must forgive someone else for something they've done. That's a personal choice and decision for each of us to make. I will say till I'm blue in the face that I think you must forgive yourself, because I think healing is very difficult without self-forgiveness. But when you get to a place where you have the willingness to forgive someone else, think about this. It's very hard to forgive someone if we don't accept what's happened. It's very difficult to accept what's happened if we don't understand how and why it happened. So as we work on understanding, that opens the door to acceptance. As we work on acceptance, that opens the door to forgiveness. In fact, I'm going to share something here at the end that I often share in family program. My father and I had a very difficult relationship. And a lot of the traumatic experience I had at one point in time in my life was due to that relationship. And I wrote a letter to my father. And part of what I said in that letter was, I now offer you my forgiveness of everything you ever did and said to me, as I ask for your forgiveness of everything I ever did and said to you. And I folded that letter up and I put it in his coat pocket as he laid in his open casket, because I wanted it to be next to his heart forever. I walked out of that door a free man. Because you see, the powerful thing about forgiveness, through forgiveness I set a prisoner free, only to discover the prisoner was me. And that's part of my own healing journey, and I share that with you in case it can be helpful for you today, as well as everything else that's been shared up here, so that you really start to know that healing is possible, hope is possible. There's so many ways that we're able to get through this. And I kind of say it this way when people are here in treatment, hey, for every problem you can give me, I can give you 5 different solutions or things we can do about it. And I want to really leave you with that sense of hope that we know this stuff today, we understand it really well, we accept what needs to be done for healing to happen, and as long as you do your part, I promise you, healing will happen. Thank you.